Hey friends, it's Mal. Welcome back to the Witch Church podcast if you're listening, and welcome back to my YouTube channel if you are watching. If you're here on YouTube, make sure to give me a like, a comment, a subscribe. It really helps my channel. And if you're listening on the podcast and you would prefer to watch me on YouTube, you can check out the link in the show notes. That'll take you to YouTube. But I'm super excited today because we're back with a Jupiter in Gemini deep dive. I am really curious. You'll notice I'm going to use the word curious a lot in this video because it's sort of my key term for Jupiter in Gemini. But I'm feeling curious about this transit, how it will manifest, and I'm looking forward to really being able to bring awareness to Jupiter being in the sign of Gemini, since some of you might know, if you are a student of traditional astrology, you know that Jupiter is actually strongest or in domicile in Sagittarius. So this means that when Jupiter is in Gemini, it is opposite to its domicile in Sagittarius. So what does that really mean in English? Well, there's something a little bit peculiar about Jupiter in Gemini. We won't say it's bad or negative or anything along those lines, but I think when a planet is opposite its domicile, what it means, it's sort of like a symbol that, this planet, it's almost in a foreign land, so to speak. Like it's sort of out of its element. It can't completely function in the way that is most natural to the planet, right? And this makes for an interesting transit, because then the planet itself has to figure out, how am I going to function in these conditions that are inherently oppositional to my natural forces, right? Like it would kind of be like if you were super good at being a watercolor painter, and it's like the difference between being in an art studio that has all of your supplies, all of your watercolor painting stuff. You can tell I'm not actually a painter. So imagine you're a watercolor painter and you're used to being in a place with all of your resources, and someone plops you into a pottery studio, and you still have those natural artistic sort of traits where maybe you can visualize certain projects or come up with ideas or tap into your imagination, but suddenly your watercolor painting skills aren't able to be used because you're in this pottery studio, and you have to figure out, how am I going to make art from this completely different modality? Okay, so that's kind of what Jupiter's going through in a way when he's in Gemini, okay? And by the way, it will actually be May 25th, 2024. Jupiter will move into Gemini. And it's funny because Venus on May 23rd, 2024 will move into Gemini. So Venus goes into Gemini just 2 days before Jupiter. Jupiter will follow on May 25th. And because Jupiter operates in roughly a 12-year cycle, the last time we experienced a Jupiter in Gemini transit was June 2012 through June 2013. So that was the last time Jupiter was in Gemini. give or take 12 years ago. So think back to that time period and, compare and contrast. If you are an astrology student who is studying their own chart and pays attention to how the transits are cycling through their chart, take a look. Where is the Gemini house in your chart? If you don't know, don't worry, because I'm going to do the rising sign forecasts in the other half of the video. But, look at where Gemini is in your chart and think back to this summer 2012 through summer 2013 and think about what was going on, and see if there's any comparisons, I guess, to like maybe what's happening now. For me, it's weird, just because, in June 2012 through June 2013, it would have basically been my senior year of high school. So this is interesting because Jupiter would have been transiting my 12th house. And this, especially the first half of Jupiter in Gemini, it would have represented a pretty stressful time because I think that must have been when I was finishing up like college applications, and I also was probably still visiting some colleges, making those decisions. That would have been a sort of Jupiter and Gemini theme for me. And at the same time, because the 12th house is a bit of a house that can represent isolation and struggle, I was actually really struggling my senior year of high school in the sense that I was like so ready to be done. Like I hated high school. I went to like a really massively large high school with like 1,000 kids per grade, and I'm like quite an introverted person and I'm easily overstimulated. So you could imagine the environment wasn't great. And I think I was trying to figure out like, how do I sort of make it through this last year of high school? What's kind of nice is during that year though, I ended up taking a creative writing class, which was the thing that sort of saved me in my senior year of high school because it ignited this passion. And I ended up then going on to college, and one of my majors was creative writing. So for me, I think about how the 12th house can kind of, for me at least, it's a time of struggle, but it almost ignites the next step and sets you up for a bit of a rebirth. And it also is sort of the final countdown before things might pay off, right? And for me, the payoff then came my freshman year of college when I had Jupiter in Cancer in the first house. And I mean, my college, to this day, it's a place that I just adore deeply. And it was a great experience and like a million times better than high school. So if anybody happens to be listening who is in high school and you're having a hard time, keep going. College, it gets so much better. I'm so happy I made it to my college experience. And but anyways, we'll get into the rising sign forecasts a little bit more deeply. That was just a little little ADHD story time about my 2012 through 2013, but hopefully I will inspire you to look back to 12 years ago and almost compare and contrast. It's not to say that the exact same themes will appear, but you'll see there's some there's some cycles that you might notice are coming back up again for re-examination. Now in general, let's just talk about Jupiter in Gemini as a whole. What's the vibe? What's the vibe of the planet of expansion being in Gemini? First things first, I did want to mention that according to the tarot correspondences via the Order of the Golden Dawn, Jupiter in Gemini is actually correlated with the Eight of Swords in the tarot, which I know if you know the tarot, you're thinking about the Eight of Swords and you're like, oof, that doesn't seem good, Mal. But I think the Eight of Swords in an interesting way depicts Jupiter in Gemini really well. We mentioned that Jupiter in Gemini has to figure out, how do I function in a Jupiterian way in an environment that isn't completely set up for massive expansion? So in the Eight of Swords, we see this figure who is blindfolded and wrapped up in this sort of confined thing. They're almost mummified. Actually, one of my students says that they're wrapped in toilet paper. And we get this image of someone who is so stuck in their head and zoomed in on what is going on in the mental internal world that they're unable to take the next step forward. They're almost in this analysis paralysis, and they're unable to do the Jupiterian thing, which is to move forward, expand, go into the next environment, the new environment. Instead, they're doing this Gemini thing, where Gemini is the planet of, the sign that has to do with close-up study. If you've ever, think back to science class when you were in school and you were looking at things through a microscope, that is Gemini. Gemini collects the data, and sometimes the data is very microscopic. If anybody, I don't know, I'm sure we could look up some charts of famous scientists or something and see that they have maybe some sort of Gemini placement, but Gemini tends to be very good at collecting the data, noticing the details. I don't necessarily think they're gonna make meaning from the details, but they're at least noticing and collecting the details. And then later in the zodiac is where we make meaning of the details, which is more of a Sagittarian thing, which is where Jupiter typically is his strongest, right? So Jupiter likes to make meaning out of things. And Gemini is a little bit more no, we're in the data collection phase. We aren't necessarily turning all of this into a poem or a philosophy or a pedagogy. We're just taking notes, making the Excel spreadsheet, but it's fun. That's the thing. Gemini's a little bit more like that little kid in the library who gets really excited. They just got a library card. What's that saying? What is that saying about a library card? Everything's always fun if you have a library card. I totally just butchered that. I should text my library friend right now and ask her. But anyways, there's ignore that. But there's something about just the joy of learning when you are a little kid. The first time you're presented with information, the first time you're learning to read or write, the first time you're you get that library card and you can check out a book, that is Gemini. And going back to the Eight of Swords, we can see that sort of detail-oriented moment where the person in the Eight of Swords, they're getting so stuck in the details of things that, again, they're in that analysis paralysis. They can't break out of it. This isn't to say that Jupiter in Gemini inherently brings analysis paralysis. But I think it could be a shadow side of Jupiter in Gemini, especially depending on what house Jupiter in Gemini is transiting for you. I also think when it comes to, Jupiter in Gemini and the sort of higher frequency or the energy this combination carries, it's almost like there's this divine curiosity. There's these special interests that are worthwhile to go out and start to collect information about. And I also think Jupiter in Gemini is a little bit of a jokester, a little bit of a class clown. I was thinking about, I wasn't this kid in school, but I feel like everybody has this kid in their class who, is kind of like a class clown and, makes everybody laugh. And maybe the teacher does get mad at them once in a while, but at the end of the day, the teacher kind of loves them too. And sometimes they don't really pay attention, but yet they'll get like 100% on the test. They're just kind of like naturally gifted in that way. That for me is sort of the Jupiter and Gemini archetype. And I think it shows that when Jupiter is in Gemini, the best thing, well, who am I to say? But according to the School of Mal, I think the best thing that we can do is get curious, which I'm tempted to do the English major thing right now. I actually want to look up the definition of curious. So I have here, to be curious is to be eager to know or learn something, okay? And curious can also mean strange, unusual, peculiar, bizarre. So this word also comes from the Latin word that means care, which is kind of funny because to be curious, you're almost taking time to care about something, right? So there's this newfound curiosity kind of cracking open in our Gemini house. And again, I'm thinking now I want to go back to like 2012 and look up the dates of like, when did I receive my college acceptance letter? When did I do this interview? When did I go here? Like, there was this new curiosity that was starting to crack open for me around that time, which was like thinking about life outside of high school and the sort of really long, sort of tumultuous path of high school life, So 12 years ago, what new sense of curiosity might have cracked open for you? I just wanted to also, I wanted to mention a few celeb charts before we get into the rising signs, the rising sign forecasts for Jupiter and Gemini. But another thing I wanted to mention, I have two charts. One is actually Nicholas Sparks, who I believe I mentioned in a different video, or I talked about Nicholas Sparks somewhere, either in my podcast or YouTube at some point in the past 6 months. And I used Nicholas Sparks as my example for a Venus-Mars conjunction in the 12th house. Or no, it was a Venus and Mars conjunction in Aquarius. But I also want to point out that, besides that placement, Nicholas Sparks, who, by the way, I should say, he's sort of if you don't know him, most people do, but he wrote like a bunch of romance books like The Notebook and A Walk to Remember, The Last Song. He's a super famous author because he wrote all of these romance novels, and also, though, they got turned into like famous movies, right? And in general, he has kind of an interesting story. What I noticed too is Nicholas Sparks happens to be a Jupiter in Gemini natally. What's also interesting is Nicholas Sparks is a Saturn in Pisces as well. And this means that he has, this Saturn in Pisces square to Jupiter in Gemini, which we will literally experience in the transits at some point during Jupiter in Gemini's transit because Saturn is in Pisces. So that'll be kind of the tension point of Jupiter in Gemini. But it's interesting that Nicholas Sparks has that in his natal signature. So I wouldn't be surprised if in this upcoming year, he comes up in the news. Maybe he comes out with a new book. Maybe there's some kind of tension, or I don't know, there's something that could come up for him during this time. Now, his Jupiter in Gemini, him being a Pisces rising, natally, he has it in the 4th house of the home, and it's conjunct his IC. So what does that mean in English? Well, I actually think about how Nicholas Sparks, he was born in Nebraska, but he always had this sort of fixation on the South, specifically the Carolinas, which feels kind of like a 4th house Jupiter thing. Like I have an interest in living somewhere, and I don't really know why, I just do. And if you've ever read a Nicholas Sparks novel, a lot of those, I think almost all of his books take place in the South, South Carolina, North Carolina, Savannah, Georgia, I think is one of the places that the book takes place. And these places are like a huge backdrop to the plot itself most of the time. So I don't know. I just kind of see that sort of fixation or obsession he has about like this sort of Southern idealism, being that Jupiter and Gemini conjunct the IC. I think that's kind of interesting. That, and also that most of his characters in his book also have this sort of Southern idealism. Now, the other person I thought of for Jupiter and Gemini, by the way, I could be mentioning Kanye right now because he is like the famous Jupiter and Gemini, Sun in Gemini, conjunct Jupiter and Gemini. We could go into that. I decided to go elsewhere because I figured a lot of astrologers would be mentioning that Kanye is a Jupiter in Gemini. But I realized that Charlie Sheen is Gemini rising with Jupiter in Gemini natally. So that's kind of funny. Charlie Sheen being the most famous for being an actor on the sitcom 2.5 Men. I like to think that when Gemini, because Gemini is the sign of the twins, sometimes things come in twos when there's something Gemini going on, especially during Mercury retrograde in Gemini. We have to do everything twice. But just even the fact that he got famous for a show called 2.5 Men. I mean, it feels very Gemini. He also became famous because he ended up being the highest paid actor on television at the time, earning $1.8 million per episode of 2.5 Men. Now, in Placidus, Charlie Sheen's Jupiter in Gemini is in the second house of money. So I think that's important to note. Yet, he's on this sitcom, he's a jokester, he has this class clown energy, and also it kind of blows up in his face, like part of his sort of evolution. If we kind of think back to when he was fired from 2.5 Men in March 2012, so that actually would have been right before a Jupiter return for him. Around that time, 2011, he starts appearing in the news because he's acting like a total asshat, right? And he's also an addict. That doesn't inherently make him an asshat, but nevertheless, there's allegations against him with domestic violence. He also comes out publicly with being HIV positive, and that ends up creating a period of time, at least in the States, where there's like this complete boost of the general public going to be tested for HIV. So his sort of coming out as HIV positive ends up almost in a roundabout way becoming like, he becomes this spokesperson almost for getting tested. So anyways, I think that Jupiter in Gemini thing is really present in Charlie Sheen's story. Like, he becomes wildly successful, which is a Jupiterian thing. And yet, as it's in Gemini, it's sort of like the expansion ends up blowing up on him. And it's almost like his jokester nature of not taking things seriously and trying to bypass responsibilities and sort of ride this Icarus effect. It ends up blowing up in his face, right? So we can use him, we can use Charlie Sheen as maybe like the sort of the martyr of Jupiter in Gemini, right? Saint Jupiter in Gemini and what happened with him. So those are just two slight examples of Jupiter and Gemini showing up natally. Even though we're talking about the transit in this video, I think it's helpful to look at the natal placement of Jupiter and Gemini and let that speak for maybe the signatures of the energy itself. And if you have Jupiter and Gemini natally, you would be you'd be around the age of 12, 24, 36, 48, 60, because it goes in 12, right? So you're now coming up on a Jupiter return. So comment below if you are a Jupiter in Gemini natally, if you're coming up on a Jupiter return, and let us know, like, what have you experienced with Jupiter in Gemini in your chart? So that's it for like the introduction part. I'm going to take a quick break and then we're going to come back for the rising sign forecasts. Okay, friends, we're back. Let's dive into our rising sign forecasts. Again, Jupiter will ingress into Gemini on May 25th, 2024, and he'll stay there for a little over a year until early June 2025. So keep in mind that we won't feel the full extent of Jupiter and Gemini's influence on our charts right away. You know, it's possible with the ingress, sometimes we do notice the themes right away, but when it comes to the full story, a Jupiterian story takes a year or so. And then, you know, Jupiter takes 12 years to go around the whole zodiac. So just know that this Jupiter story with your Jupiter in Gemini transit won't come through all at once. And you might already even be feeling the winds blowing from Taurus to Gemini, because we've had Jupiter in Taurus for about a year now. We just had the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction in Taurus. So whatever's happening in your Taurus house, it's almost like now it's a domino effect, and now something is going to be kind of falling into the Gemini house. So let's actually start with the Gemini risings. Jupiter will be ingressing into your first house on May 25th. By the way, I've said this before in previous videos, but just in case you are new to my channel, I am operating in the whole house system. So even if you typically use Placidus or the Koch house system or whatever equal houses, yeah, come vibe with me just for this video over in the whole house, whole sign system. And I find that the whole house system is particularly good for like a predictive element of things. So Gemini rising, we've got Jupiter entering the first house being the place of the self, the identity, and even the path that we are walking. Okay, so it's funny because I know a Gemini rising who moved to Arizona after college and just like completely thrived, you know. And it's not all, we don't always move to a new city after college and like love it, but she like really thrived there. And I almost think Arizona's been sort of part of her identity for a long time, right? And recently this Gemini rising got a new job all the way in Florida. So congratulations. If you're listening, you know who you are. Personally, I'm excited that, being a Chicagoan, I'm excited that she's moving from one hot climate to another hot climate, because it's perks for me when I go to visit her. But anyways, this move for her to Florida, although it's motivated by career, it's also motivated because her partner got a new job in Florida. She's getting a new job in Florida. There's almost like this identity shift where, in taking this new job across the country, this previous identification with like being in Arizona and having this experience is now coming to a close. So, and this whole new expansionary era of her identity is now unfolding. So some Gemini risings could notice like really big shifts, like I just talked about with my friend. Not only is there a shift in career, but there's a shift in the home, there's a shift kind of in partnership, and there's a shift in personal identity. And this is kind of what happens when something does transit the first house, because it opposes the 7th house of relationships and then squares the 10th house of career and 4th house of the home. So I just really think this is a big fool's journey moment, you know, for the Gemini risings. There's an expansion of identity. Even if you're a Gemini rising and you're listening to this right now and you're like, Mal, like I'm not having any of these big changes that you're describing with your friend, I would also invite you to think about, you know, have there has there been anything you've been meaning to change for a while? Did anything come up while Jupiter was in Taurus, in your 12th house of the subconscious for the past year? You know, what came up there? Did Jupiter trigger something about what you truly desire and want for your life? And is there a part of you that's realizing that you are being held back by your own self and your own beliefs about what is possible? And Jupiter entering the first house really gives us that spark of courage, I think, to show up more courageously and also taking the risk. I mean, going back to my friend, I mean, it is a big risk to leave Arizona. That's been her home for the past 7 years and is now 6-7 years and is now, you know, going to a completely different place. She doesn't know for sure if she's going to like it. She doesn't know for sure if this job's going to work out, etc., etc. But there's a little bit of this, I got to take the risk in order to grow, which I think the Gemini Risings especially will be experiencing over the next year. Okay. So then we've got Cancer Risings. So, I'm a Cancer Rising, so I kind of have been, you know, the past year with Jupiter in Taurus in the 11th house, I mean, it's been like so expansionary when it comes to friendships and networks and groups. Just in this last bit of Jupiter in Taurus, I have been kind of spearheading with a few friends the resurgence, the rebirth of the Chicago astrology group. If you are in the Chicagoland area and you're looking for a group that hosts meetups for astrology students, find my Instagram in the show notes and reach out to me there or reach out to me via email. But, you know, there's just been so much community stuff going on the past year. New friends, new networks. I find myself in like random group activities. Like a couple weekends ago, I went on this queer bike riding expedition with like 50 other bike riders, queer bike riders, and we rode like 15 miles. Like there's just been so much community that now as Jupiter is moving into the 12th house, the 12th house can be symbolic of the cave, you know, the ashram, the meditation room, the silent retreat. So I am feeling like there's a couple projects that are coming through that are going to require more solitude for me. I also think that there's this desire to travel that always comes up for me because I have a 9th house stellium, but we often forget the 12th house, as well as the 6th house, the 3rd house, and the 9th house, all have correlations when it comes to travel. We typically think of only the 9th house, but it's actually all 4 of those houses, 12, 9, 3, and 6. So when things transit the 12th house, sometimes we end up traveling for spiritual studies, spiritual retreats. We take solo trips, or, you know, we take our pilgrimage to Canterbury, and I've really felt like, oh my gosh, I need to escape. Like I need to go to my like places by myself and just hike the mountain and be by myself for a while. There also might be, for some Cancer Risings, this new profound sense of awakening. Maybe there's like this breakthrough in therapy, or maybe some Cancer Risings will have an experience with plant medicine. That is sometimes a 12th house experience. Anything that has to do with unpacking and unpeeling the unconscious territory in order to break those patterns that work against us, anything that could be sabotaging our success. And I don't just mean success in like a money sense. I mean success for you as a person who is meant to experience the things that you love, you know? So I think there's a real awakening coming for the Cancer risings, which will be really nice. And that awakening could be motivated by travel or therapy or spiritual studies, something along those lines. Okay, so the Leo risings, we've got Jupiter moving out of your 10th house and into your 11th house. So this past year has been really heavy in the career expansion front. I know a Leo rising in this past year who's gotten a new job. From that new job, they have like dozens of new clients. They also went on a trip pertaining to a work training. So it's been like a very career building year with Jupiter in the 10th house. And now that Jupiter's moving into Gemini in the 11th house, I wonder how this Leo rising is going to expand in terms of groups and networking. So for the Leo risings, you may be called to join a club, a group, a class. You may be called to go out and seek your tribe, quote unquote. Let's say your main passion is theater and you've been doing a lot of things in the theater world for years. I think the Jupiter in the 11th house could be an expansion of the pre-existing theater community that you're in, but it could also represent you completely joining a new part of the community, maybe like the Gardeners Association or the, or whatever, like the synchronized swimmers of the YMCA. Like, I don't know. There's something here about new groups of people that are needing to be invited in, because sometimes, you know, birds, what's that phrase? Birds of a feather flock together. So sometimes it is positive for us to spend time with other people who share our passion, but it's also positive to expand our network and have a lot of different viewpoints from different spheres of personality and different outlooks and different viewpoints of life, and that can change us. Like, for instance, me as an astrologer, like sometimes talking to a group of acupuncturists helps me understand my profession as an astrologer more deeply, you know? So don't discount the power of going outside of your typical group in the next year and meeting new people. Okay, Virgo rising, we've got Jupiter in the 9th house of education and travel, leaving Taurus in the 9th house and going into the 10th house of career. Really classic example. My little cousin, who's a Virgo rising, just graduated college. Jupiter in the 9th house. Jupiter finishing up in the 9th house. She just graduated college. She had a lot of profound travel experiences in the past year, which is very Jupiter in the 9th house. And now that she's graduated college, she's coming home to find a job, which is a Jupiter moving into the 10th house experience. And I am predicting she's going to find that pretty fast. She's going to find that job pretty fast because Jupiter is going to move into her 10th house of career in just about 10 days. Now, in this sense, for her, she's actually the perfect example because it's Jupiter in Gemini moving into her 10th house of career. And this is going to be like her first job. Like, she's had internships, she's had experiences, but this is like her first job out of college. And that is such a good metaphor for remaining curious with Jupiter in Gemini. She's going to have to learn a lot of new things. She's going to have to collect a lot of data, a lot of information. There's going to be trials and tribulations with learning and expanding. There might even be a sense of, I'm expanding so much all at once, I'm overwhelmed. That can be a 10th house Jupiter thing. Even if you are a Virgo rising and you're not, in a place in your life where you're like graduating college and getting a new job, I could see work being filled with more responsibility, whether that be because of a promotion or maybe you're shifting career paths in some way, and just a new learning experience coming through for those Jupiter in Gemini, for that Jupiter in Gemini transit through the 10th house. I'm kind of excited about what the Virgo risings are going to find with this transit, and I think career and also just how you're showing up in the sense of leadership and authority feels really pertinent right now. Okay, the Libra risings. So Libra risings, we just had a year of Jupiter in Taurus in the 8th house of shared resources. So, it's possible, I've talked to a lot of Libra risings. Fun fact, I think it's because I have Venus on my descendant maybe, but I swear all of my, so many of my clients are Libra risings, Venusians. I only talk to Libra risings at this point. That's not to say if you're not a Libra rising, you can totally still make an appointment with me, but there's something about the Libra risings that they just find me. So with the dozens literally of Libra risings I talk to from my client work, there's been a lot of expansion in the 8th house, especially when it comes to relationships and who we're meant to build a foundation with and who we're not meant to build a foundation with, who we're combining resources with and who we're not combining resources with. There could kind of be like a make it or break it thing with relationships for the Libra risings, just realizing, well, my partner really doesn't want to have kids and I do, and this is a deal breaker and I can't continue to share resources with this person because our paths are so different. That's classic expansion in the 8th house, which sometimes actually requires a letting go kind of moment. On the other hand, though, there could be marriage, there could be moving in together, there could be a deepening of commitment for the Libra risings and partnerships. Their partner could have gotten a raise, their partner could have expanded in some way, their partner is transforming in some way. It's been a lot of partnership stuff with Jupiter, first in Aries and then moving into Taurus. So it's been about 2 years of Jupiter highlighting your partnership stuff. So it's almost I almost view the Jupiter moving into the 9th house of higher education, belief system, travel. I kind of feel like the Libra risings are now entering an era where they're more focused on themselves. It's not to say everybody's breaking up with their partner. But like, there's just something where it's like, okay, the heat, I'm turning off the heat on my pot of partnership. And now I really want to like dive into what interests me. What do I want to get curious about? You know, do I want to take a solo traveling trip? Do I want to learn something new? Do I want to go back to school? Do I just want to sign up for a class, like a pottery or a dance class, just to experience something new? Do I want to dive deeper into my spiritual studies? For some Libra risings, I think Jupiter and Gemini in the 9th house could kind of be like a spiritual resurgence. Like some Libra risings could get really into the study of tarot or astrology or energy healing, something along those lines. There could be an unpacking of past religious trauma in order to come more fully to our own religion of our higher selves, if that makes sense. But overall, I'm excited for the Libra risings, especially if partnership the past couple years has felt like heavy and like it's been taking a lot of your energy for whatever reason. Jupiter moving into the 9th house feels like a good symbol where it's like, okay, I'm ready to focus on myself. I'm ready to shift my energy towards my own spiritual expansion. I want to learn new things. I want to experience things, and I want to get back to myself. Okay. Okay, Scorpio rising. All right. So Scorpio rising. Gosh, I'm trying to think. Who do I know who's a Scorpio rising? I think that, you know, Jupiter moving out of the 7th house of partnership and into the 8th house of shared resources. It is possible that Scorpio risings met someone during the Jupiter and Taurus time period, which would have been basically May 2023 through now, May 2024. There's something more committal happening with the Scorpio risings in partnership. And at the same time, even the Scorpio risings who like didn't find their soulmate or whatever, you know, during this past year, I think there's some clarity about what you're looking for when it comes to a partner and how certain partnerships can be expansive where other partnerships can be limiting. This also, you know, not to bring in Saturn, but I am going to bring in Saturn. You know, Saturn's in your 5th house of romance. So there might be this tension for the Scorpio risings about like what partnership is more like short-term romance, not serious, or maybe parroting as serious, but not actually serious. Disguising, that's more the word. Disguising itself as serious, even though it's more of an illusion, versus like, where are the partnerships that actually do have the juice to go long-term? Then that's not me putting long-term connections on this huge pedestal, because certainly I think short-term connections can still be profoundly meaningful, and we can learn a lot from those connections as well. But there is some sort of relationship test, I think, that the Scorpio risings have been going through. And now that Jupiter at the end of May 2024 is moving into Gemini, Gemini is your 8th house of shared resources. So there's something even a little bit more serious coming into play with who you're choosing to combine resources with. Some Scorpio risings could be moving in with a partner or doing something with their resources in order to create some kind of foundation. I also think because the 8th house has its connections to death and transformation, I mean, it is possible that the Scorpio risings could experience some sort of grief with Jupiter going through the 8th house. This isn't me saying like every Scorpio is going to, experience some sort of death in the family or anything like that. Maybe that's one or two people, but I think for the most part, though, sometimes grief is because of ancestral wounds, or we might be grieving something from our childhood, or we're grieving something that already passed, right? So I could see a lot of Scorpio risings doing that grief work, that getting really vulnerable with themselves, and maybe even finding a therapist or a grief group or something along those lines, and working through some of these things in order to release, which I think is always good for Scorpio placements, to go on the journey of releasing. Okay. Sag Rising. Okay, so Sag Rising, Jupiter is going into the 7th house of relationships. So I think the Sagittarius risings are kind of ready to experiment and be curious when it comes to their relationships and their partnerships. This kind of reminds me of like, I don't know, like a lot of people got divorced or broke up during the Panini press, right? Like, who doesn't know someone whose relationship blew up during like 2020 or 2021, right? You could even be one of those people. And sometimes like what blew up had been going on for like 10, 20 years, right? So this transit almost reminds me of someone who was married or in a really long-term commitment for like years and years and years. Maybe they're no longer in that commitment anymore. They've taken some time to grieve and heal. And now as Jupiter in Gemini is entering the 7th house of relationships, finally they feel kind of ready to date again, or like open themselves back up to dating. Yet, 20 years ago when they were dating, it was completely different. We didn't have dating apps. We didn't have like all of this, tomfoolery with like social media and stuff like that. So it's almost like a new world of entering, like, how do I date in 2024 after so long of being in a different partnership or something along those lines. Again, that's not true for all Sagittarius risings, but like I'm making up this story because Jupiter in Gemini typically has us learning something new, right? So I'm almost like, what are the Sagittarius risings learning when it comes to partnership? On the other hand, some Sagittarius risings could be getting married, having a child with their partner. I see that Saturn in the 4th house, the home and parents. So some Sagittarius risings could be becoming a parent right now, and thus their relationship with their partner is going to change, and they're going to have to be curious and learn new ways to be in partnership as parents. I could see some Sagittarius risings trying out new relationship structures with their pre-existing partnership. Maybe there's some kind of opening of a relationship or something like that. Some kind of sexual exploration or experimentation, things like that sometimes have to do with Gemini. So I'm excited for the Sagittarius rising. Seems like a lot of you guys are getting back out there on the dating scene. Now, Cap rising. We've got Jupiter moving into the 6th house of health and routine. So this for me sort of marks a new era where you have time to focus on yourself. But I'm getting this message that the time isn't going to be wrapped up in a bow and put on your doorstep. Like, you're going to have to make the time, but at the same time, like, there's this calling to just focus a little bit more on yourself, your health, getting your daily life sorted out. It kind of feels like your daily life is yours again after a while of being focused on other things. I think sometimes when I see a positive sixth house transit, meaning like Jupiter or Venus is transiting the sixth house, sometimes I think it's a good time to seek out, like if you've been looking for a new doctor or a new dentist or a new therapist or a new acupuncturist or whatever, you typically can meet more easily the healers that can help you. And I just like this for getting health and wellness back on track. Maybe some Capricorn risings are going to do like a hard commitment to themselves. Every day I'm going to take a 2-mile walk. No excuses. You know, there's something here about this sort of recommitting to the self. And for some reason, this is such a weird thing to say, but I just heard the phrase, listen to your organs, which, like, I don't exactly know what that means, but I guess for me, like, as someone who sometimes has like a gallbladder flare, I'm prone to gallbladder flare stuff. Like sometimes when I'm in a flare, like I wasn't listening to my body previously and I was maybe like eating what I wasn't supposed to be eating or whatever. And then like my body talks to me if I'm not listening, right? So there's something like that coming in with Jupiter and Gemini in the sixth house, like maybe being curious about what your body is telling you, being in dialogue with your organs or with your body in general. I know this sounds weird, but you know, I think we, as humans, we actually have this immense power to be in dialogue with our bodies because our minds and our bodies are very much connected, right? So that's that for you, Cap Rising. Aquarius Rising. We've got Jupiter moving into the 5th house of romance, pleasure, and creativity. So I think this is a beautiful time for the Aquarius Risings to get back in touch with their inner child. Just because there's such a playful nature of the 5th house. The 5th house rules over the things that bring us joy, bring us pleasure. It's the things that sort of beckon that creative spark within us. If some Aquarius risings have felt like they used to be a poet, or they used to be an artist, or they used to be really into this hobby or this sport, it's a good time to like have a rebirth with that hobby, and join a club. For some reason, the image of someone bowling just came to mind. So if you're an Aquarius rising who like really likes bowling or has wanted to join a bowling league or something, that just came through for someone. You know, there's something there about like, what is fun? I'm sick of like the heaviness of everyday life, and I just want to have a little fun. And I would say, as your astrologer, do it. I think it's a great time to focus on what activities bring you joy and what activities allow you to feel connected to your inner child. So I really like that for you, Aquarius risings. And I'll mention this at the end again, but if that hit any Aquarius risings, I have a upcoming creativity class called Unmask Your Creativity that starts June 5th. So if you're listening to this in time, check out that class. It's in the show notes. You might be into it. Okay, Pisces rising. We've got Jupiter in the 3rd house. I also think the third house has its roots in learning and being curious, because I guess the third house is somewhat correlated with Gemini. So the fact that Jupiter has, or sorry guys, I'm ahead of myself here. You know what, we're not going to cut that out because astrologers aren't perfect. But let's start over. So Pisces rising, Jupiter has been in the third house where Taurus is for you. So you have been learning, you have been being curious about new subjects, you have been digging into maybe your spiritual studies, which I think is a third house theme as well. And soon at the end of the month, Jupiter will be in Gemini, moving into your fourth house. So the fourth house can be about our parents. The fourth house can be about our home and our family and our ancestral roots. And I could see some Pisces risings really maybe marinating with their own relationship to their parents, whether their parents are still on Earth or on the other side. There's something about really taking into account, like, this was not my wound, this was my mom's wound, or this pattern is actually my dad's and it's not mine. I see that Pisces risings are getting really curious about ancestral healing. Certainly some Pisces risings could be moving or doing something expansionary in the home. Like, let's say you've been renting a while and now you want to buy your apartment or something like that. And at the same time, I think changing the energy around your home could be really beneficial. Maybe you're painting a bedroom or rearranging furniture, painting a doorway, something like that, where you're giving yourself room and space in your own house to heal and be with yourself. So I think that's going to be really exciting, Pisces risings. And I'm interested to know, like, is ancestral healing something that has been coming to the forefront of your mind? I actually know a Pisces rising who recently, I think, went back to a place. She took a trip to a place that is very significant to not only her childhood, but her parents and her parents' childhood and her family, which feels like a very Jupiter in the fourth house thing. Like maybe even traveling, even though Jupiter just has its roots in travel. So maybe traveling to those places that are important. Okay, Aries rising. Jupiter is moving into the third house. So again, the third house can be technology and communication, can be things like social media. It's the place where we are sort of communicating our message with others. So it's possible that some Aries risings I could see like making a TikTok account or making an Instagram account for their special interest, starting a podcast, maybe even starting a blog. There's something here about Jupiter and Gemini in the third house. Like, I want to get my message out there. I want to write more. I want to communicate more. And maybe I'm just getting a little bit more ballsy in general with how I'm communicating. I also wonder about like your relationship to the neighborhood and your relationship to your local community, which also has its roots in the third house. And certainly when Jupiter goes through the third house, we see things like our siblings and our cousins and even our aunts and uncles having expansionary moments. So it's not an unusual thing, for Jupiter to be going through the third house and, we see our sibling get engaged or married or have a baby or something along those lines. So I'm interested to know how this third house theme plays out for the Aries risings, but anything that has to do with communication, the throat chakra, and really conveying your message to the outside world. Okay, and lastly, Taurus risings. So Taurus risings have had like this massive shift in the past year with the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction going through the first house. Your identity has been changing. You've been maybe feeling stronger or more secure in who you are. You've been changing who you are. You've been sort of coming out of the closet, so to speak, with a lot of things that you want to do and work on. And now that Jupiter is entering the second house of money, I would say there's something like this sense of I'm getting more serious about maybe saving or organizing my money so I can continue to expand in these authentic ways. I'm even thinking about my dad, who's Taurus rising, and thinking about how he really wants to retire. And I'm wondering if, Jupiter and Gemini in the second house of money, I wonder if he's gonna like reorganize his finances so he can potentially retire even earlier. Like there's something, not that he's retiring early now, but just, bump it up, make that retirement date come a little bit faster. I think there's something like that metaphor that I just gave with my dad. There's something like I need to organize my finances in order to take the next step. I will say whenever Jupiter is going through the second house, I really don't think it matters the sign. We can go a little cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs with the spending. So be careful of overspending. Be careful of making investments in like a pipe dream. That's kind of like a Jupiter in the second house. And at the same time, I mean, like Jupiter is a benefic. So you might find yourself in a position where you're wanting to invest your money in something as long as it's been thought out. As long as it's been well thought out and it's not this random thing that you woke up wanting to do in the middle of the night, I say go for it. But it's those times where we're spending very frivolously, we're racking up debt even, or like pretending like our financial realities don't exist. That is sometimes the negative consequence of Jupiter going through the second house, right? But overall, kind of excited. I think for some Taurus risings, this could represent a new job, for sure. I mean, new opportunities. It'll have to come from your own sense of curiosity though. And it'll have to be motivated by your sense of being like, ooh, like I'm curious about shifting my work life in this way. What would that look like? Okay. Friends, it was so fun to chat with you today. I've got an upcoming container that I'm teaching with my co-teacher / creativity mentor, Sarah Cook. It's called Unmask Your Creativity. It starts June 4th. It's a 3-month creativity container. It's just this beautiful transformation where we start to reconnect with our creative energy, whether you're a writer, an artist, a painter, an actor, a choreographer. All creatives are welcome to join. I would even challenge you. We would actually love for people to join who doubt their creativity in some way, right? Like if you think, I could never be an artist, or I've always wanted to be a creative, but I have no idea how to harness my creative energy. I have no idea what that looks like. I feel stuck. This is actually such a beautiful container for you. If you've been stuck on one of your creative projects or wondering how to find motivation for a creative project, again, could be a really beautiful container. So that information will be in the show notes. And thank you so much for liking, commenting, subscribing, and I'll see you guys in the next forecast.